Good afternoon. Welcome to Robotic Process Automation Demystified. We're in the final home stretch of the day, so let's get rolling. If you haven't seen me, I'm Leslie Mueller, Strategic Partnership Specialist here at the MNCPA. Are you using the CPE log to track your MBAC credits? This member-only tool is designed to simplify CPE record keeping, making reporting your credits to the Minnesota Board of Accountancy a breeze. You can even track carryback credits and save documentation for easy reference. Access your CPE log at mncpa.org/CPE log. What are you guys up to on August 1st? How about you round out your summer with the MNCPA golf outing? Register yourself or a foursome, or even maybe sponsor a hole at our golf event. And you can find out more about this at mncpa.org/golf. Our next speakers for today are Lisa David, Frank Kelly, John Kurth, and Ken Mertzel. Lisa is a partner with eCapital Advisors. Frank is the Vice President of Transformation Architecture at Automation Anywhere. John is the Business Development Manager at eCapital Advisors. And Ken is a global industry leader in financial services advisor at Automation Anywhere. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and let's welcome Lisa, Frank, John, and Ken.
Thanks so much, Leslie. Definitely appreciate it and looking forward to today's session. I'm John Kurth with eCapital Advisors, and as Leslie mentioned, lead our automation efforts on a day-to-day here at eCapital. So we're really looking forward to today's conversation and discussion with you all, really looking at what are some of those keys to success for finance automation. As we get going here, what we'll be looking at is, okay, we've selected automation or RPA as an initiative that we want to tackle within the Office of Finance and Accounting. But now what do we do? What should we be preparing? Where should we be focusing our efforts with some of those initial use cases? What are those best practices overall as we develop a program, but also through an implementation and a successful implementation at that? As well as what are some of those common challenges that we see organizations face day in, day out. Before we get too far, though, we want to make sure that you all are paying attention here at the end of the day. So we do have a couple of polls that we're going to get started with. The first is going to be looking at what is your functional area. So are you in accounting, accounts payable or accounts receivable? Other finance, maybe IT, or outside of any of these areas. So looking forward to seeing kind of who we have in attendance and joining us here. I'm seeing a few folks responding here. So some other finance, actually a few folks outside of finance and IT. That's always fun. Quite a few accounting folks as expected. That's awesome. We'll give it a few more seconds here for the poll to come in. All right. Yeah, it looks like other finance, well, no, accounting is actually taking the lead there. So as expected, great. Next polling question is, we're looking at where are you in your automation journey specific to RPA? Are you just initially exploring things here? Are you in the proof of concept or proof of value stage? Have you already begun implementation and are looking to figure out how do we scale RPA within our organization? Or are you already enterprise-wide and saying, where else can we go? We understand the power of RPA. So it's looking like quite a few initial explorations, some proof of concepts. Oh, we do have a few implemented and scaling as well. No one quite at the enterprise-wide adoption yet, or at least just a couple of folks. So great. Okay, so majority of folks are in that initial exploration phase. All right, now the last one. What are you all wanting to get out of today? So we've kind of told you what we're going to cover, but we definitely want to make this interactive. So is it something around those best practices in managing an RPA program? Is it organizing a center of excellence, identifying what are those top use cases, or where do we even just get started? I'm thinking most people, just based on the initial exploration, it's probably going to be where do we get started? But I am seeing quite a few people say some best practices overall as well. Give it a few more seconds here. We have where to get started, definitely leading the way, and then best practices in managing, as well as top RPA use cases, neck and neck. And then just a few folks within the Center of Excellence idea as well. Awesome. All right. Well, that's definitely helpful. By all means, feel free to monitor within the Q&A. We'll be monitoring that with anything that comes in. But here to get started here, Lisa, if you wouldn't mind doing a quick introduction to yourself and eCapital overall, just for the group.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Lisa David. I'm one of the owners and partners of eCapital Advisors. I actually started out of college as a CPA and auditor at Arthur Andersen here locally in Minneapolis, and spent 8 years in public accounting. And for the last 20 years, I've been at eCapital. And eCapital really started in kind of this blue circle 20 years ago. That's when basically first generation budgeting and forecasting applications really became a best of breed, opportunity for us to kind of take our two-dimensional Excel world and really up-level that to more of a Rubik's Cube type process and have that back solve capability automatically. That continues to be a deep level of expertise for eCapital. It's evolved over the years, of course, to cloud applications and adding more like analytics and reporting and dashboarding capability with that performance management layer. In addition to that layer or swim lane at eCapital, you're really one of our most emerging fast growth areas. It's really this gray area, and with topics like today of automation. This really gets us into getting our organizations the granular insight they need on maybe accounts receivable, accounts payable. Very easy for you to focus on what products, what invoices do I need to be acting on today. And then really over the last 3 to 4 years, automation has really taken off. I'm fresh off of the Gartner CFO and Finance Executive Conference last week that actually Ken and I were both at. I think one of the best quotes in the keynote was, the cost of inaction on digital transformation is going up every day. And so a lot of our customers are wanting to start down a journey of really taking away some of those manual processes and tasks and really trying to add new insight and maybe even areas for automation that I've never considered before. And then layering in that business data science. We wrapper this as well within our customer teams of just like roadmaps or, help, advisory, data governance work, because everybody's kind of on a different path or journey of where they're at in kind of this digital elevation. But really excited to talk to you today about how automation can really add tremendous value and return on investment to your organization. So if you look at the next slide here, this is really our ecosystem of how we partner with our customer teams. The left side is really like the source systems that exist in your company. Everybody's kind of got their own ice cream flavor of what this list looks like, of what your general ledger systems are, your point of sale systems, your maybe your website, e-commerce systems, maybe your CRM, Salesforce. Everybody's kind of got their own chapter on the left. We really come in to help our customers right to the right of that, really helping them get data out of those source systems, really getting it stitched together in a usable format, as we talked about in the circles, the right side really representing that blue circle. And then automation, as you see at the bottom, almost wrappers all the way around this. And, one of a very key item, a very simple item for automation that has really caused people a lot of pain over the years is a lot of our budgeting and forecasting, even applications that you can have in the company, don't typically have built-in automation of reporting and bursting reporting. So that's just a very low-hanging fruit area that you can start with automation and really get that. Nobody should have to manually get those reports out. Let's make it automated. there's so many other areas that Ken and Frank will be talking about this afternoon that just really add that business value so the accounting and finance teams can really take the low value items out of the way so they can really focus on being a better co-pilot to the CFO. So looking forward to the conversation today. And I'd like to turn it over to Ken Mertzel from Automation Anywhere.
Thanks, Lisa. As was mentioned earlier, I'm the global industry leader for financial services Automation Anywhere, and I've spent most of my career in finance. So I speak with individuals such as yourself talking about how to apply the technology in the industry. And glad to see in the survey that lots of you are interested in use cases. So I'll talk particularly about top use cases as well as maybe where to get started from a use case standpoint. And then Frank will join me afterwards to talk about how to get started as well as best practices in managing the implementation program. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Automation Anywhere, we are the market leader in cloud RPA. Have over 5,000 customers, over 3 million digital workers. And again, you can look at all the industry studies. You don't have to take my word for it in terms of being market leader. You can look at all the industry third-party studies listed here and see our position. So what I wanted to focus on, if we start go to the next slide, is to just start talking about, first of all, what is RPA? I know when I started like 15 years ago, I was at Bank of America. Half of that as CFO of their insurance business, and most recently worked managing financial operations there for the bank, working with the chief accounting officer, and also helped them implement the first proof of concept of RPA. And here's the biggest challenge I had at first was understanding what the heck is RPA. And I found a lot of presentations talked about the benefits of RPA and use cases, but still didn't quite understand what it was. So for those of you that are relatively new to it, just simply think of it as software that sits on top of all of your existing systems and performs manual repetitive tasks exactly the way an employee would do it at the click step level. So just think about anything you're doing in terms of copying data from one system to another, extracting information from a website and putting it somewhere else, extracting PDF files and taking the information from that, putting it into another system. The digital workers can do all that. And the main difference is that it's very easy to use and scale. It's literally drag and drop technology. You don't need to be a programmer to do it. It pretty much interacts with any system you can interact with. So it can log into any ERP systems or other systems you use. And it's implemented at very low cost relative to typical technology. So if we go to the next slide, then, I want to talk a bit about why it's really taken off in finance. And in fact, the finance, department, if you will, is the biggest user of RPA across all departments, across all industries. And I think the reason for that is initially, first of all, finance tries to lead by example. So initially, finance looks at RPA in terms of driving operational efficiency, reducing costs, increasing cash flow. But increasingly, users realize there's significant additional benefits. So it can enhance, for example, the timeliness of information, accelerate the close, produce more, accurate and timely information for business decision making. In finance, a huge benefit beyond streamlining operations is really strengthening governance and tightening controls. And that's obviously a very critical in finance. So I've seen a lot of organizations say, yeah, I certainly want to streamline operations in finance, but I really like to take all those manual controls that are sitting in Excel spreadsheets and provide a lot more transparency to those. So typically when someone does an automation, we often see organizations that look through their processes and find out they have a bunch of Excel macros that were developed by someone who's no longer with the department 8 years ago and has a lot of hard-coded information in there. Whereas when you automate with RPA, you have full transparency. You can see which bots run when. You have audit trails to see exactly what bots are running. They're going to provide very consistent operations, et cetera. So huge benefit. It's also really a source of fostering innovation within the organization. So those organizations often start with RPA and then add additional AI and machine learning capabilities. And probably most importantly, particularly in finances, I've never seen an organization in finance that says, "Oh, we have unlimited budget and we can, add as many people as we want." Typically, all the budgets go to the revenue-producing areas, and so typically we're always asked to do more with fewer resources. And so the huge benefit of RPA is really enabling you to, focus your limited resources, as Lisa said, on those more value-added strategic tasks, and spend less time, copying and pasting data, creating reports, etc. So next, what I want to do is then talk specifically about, what are some of the top use cases in finance and accounting. And I'm not going to go through all of these. I just want to, and these are certainly not all the use cases, but these are a lot of the typical ones. So what I'll do is just briefly talk about some of these and then show you a couple of examples. From the survey, it looks like there are not a lot of accounts payable and accounts receivable folks, so I'll spend even less time on those. But those two areas are actually some of the biggest areas of usage in RPA, particularly because, again, they're very, high transaction volumes, very manual intensive, in AP, for example, receiving all the invoices, extracting all the information. So I'm actually going to show you an example of that. And even though it looks like most of you are not in AP, the reason I show it even to groups that have no interest in AP is because it's a good way of highlighting the capabilities, and you can think about how to apply it in your area. Same thing applies to accounts receivable in terms of processing invoices, supporting collections, setting up new customers. But when you go to record to report, and for most of you that, for example, are in accounting, I'd say there are a lot of usage, particularly within financial operations, and more specifically within manual reconciliations and manual journal entries, as well as intercompany settlements. And first of all, I'd encourage you certainly, any, for example, reconciliation that you could put through your automated reconciliation system, or any accounting transactions you can handle within your ERP system, and absolutely do that first. But for those, more complex journal entries, more complex reconciliations, that's where RPA can really play a factor. And I'll show you an example of how RPA can be applied for reconciliations. In addition, in some of the other areas, you can see in Treasury, often organizations using that to get a consolidated cash position report. So they'll consolidate all the information from their bank statements and be able to compare that to cash on the balance sheet. Tax is increasingly interested, not so much doing tax accounting, but most commonly in terms of sourcing and reconciling data, sometimes inputting the data into tax filings or into their tax filing systems. And then lastly, I get a lot of questions around FP&A, and I think that's because almost every single report I know when I managed regulatory reporting at the bank was done in Excel, and so there are certainly opportunities to automate reporting. I'd say particularly in terms of sourcing data and conducting variance analysis. But I'd encourage folks to start more, in the areas on the left in terms of financial operations or AR, AP, just because you can get that transactional. A lot of the return on investment and a lot of those more transactional high volume activities. If we go to the next, what you can see here is sort of as I described before are some of the top use cases in finance and accounting. So I mentioned them before, but these are probably the 5 most common. And what I'm going to do today is show you 2 of those, an AP example, and then also show you reconciliations. So as I mentioned, I know a lot of you don't manage accounts payable, but what I would do is think about the capabilities that you'd be describing and how you could leverage these capabilities for some of the activities you perform, because it's a really good summary of all the different capabilities. And I think one of the unique features of our platform is that you have so many different capabilities beyond just pure robotic process automation built into the platform. So a typical use case, whether frankly you're in AP or AR or other areas, is you're going to get a bunch of documents that come into an email box. In this case, invoices, but it could be bills, could be other documents. And then, typically someone's manually taking all that information and then inputting that into your ERP. But what you can do with RPA is bots can be triggered automatically. As soon as an email comes into that box, a bot can be triggered to read the email, look for a PDF, extract that PDF file, and then take all the information from that PDF using, nowadays, like we have a product called IQBot. So it's using computer vision and machine learning and other technologies to really increase the throughput rate of being able to extract that information from documents. So it'll take all that information from the invoice, typically load it into a CSV or Excel file, and then that information will be uploaded into your ERP system. And again, it can interact with any ERP system. Then once it's uploaded into the ERP, into the appropriate account, the bots can then perform matches. So it can match against good receipts. It can match against purchase orders. And then based on a set of rules that you would code into the bots, it would then determine, yes, I can automatically approve this for payment, or I'm going to send a message on to my supervisor for additional review. And the point being that, this enables you to automate, 80 to 90% of all the transactions. And then you're really focusing your limited resources on those, where you see exception handling queue, where really the more complex ones, where either a document's not readable or you don't have a match, or again, something's more complex where you need more manual review. So let's go to the next slide. And the next example I wanted to describe is around reconciliation. So again, similar concept, but typical process, right, is someone would go in, they'd manually download all the transactions out of the subledger, they download all the similar transactions out of the general ledger, perform some type of matching analysis in Excel, and spend more time on that than they would actually analyzing the out of balance accounts. And so this is a perfect example of where bots can be of value. And again, there are all types of reconciliations. There's a lot of work that's done, even in FP&A, in terms of validating data. And so same type of process here, where the bots would go out, extract information from subledgers, extract the information from the GL, perform that match, and then it would identify where there are mismatches, and it can even produce initial adjusting entries that then could be reviewed by an analyst. So again, the analyst is focusing their time on the mismatches as opposed to performing every single manual reconciliation. And then the bots can then post a copy of that reconciliation to the appropriate account. So you can see a significant amount of time freed up, obviously improved accuracy as well. And then the last thing I want to mention is, obviously, all of you are focused on finance, but RPA is certainly not a financial automation system. And so while finance, I mentioned, is a heavy user of RPA, it's really used across the entire enterprise. And I mentioned that finance often leads by example. So typically, an organization might start in finance, but then move into, and they're, especially nowadays, with all the hiring that's going on, HR is using it heavily for onboarding, for getting people set up in the systems, managing payroll. IT, it's used heavily across the board, for example, in help desk. Supply chain, as you can imagine nowadays, is a heavy user of RPA in terms of managing logistics. And then also, because of the advent of attended automation, or basically, rather than a bot sitting in the background, you click it, it does its own thing. Nowadays, you can actually use it as a digital assistant where you're interacting with the bot in real time. And as a result, we're seeing a lot more usage nowadays in contact centers, for example, where while you're on the phone with someone, you can actually pull up all their information, perform transactions, and spend more time on them. And then increasingly, we're actually seeing digital assistants in all other areas, like in finance. So you can have a bot set up for maybe your top 5 tasks, click a button. The bot will basically tell you, hey, this is the information I need. Click that, and then it'll go out into all the different systems and perform the task. So it's really something that I see being used across the board, and really used by almost all users across finance and elsewhere, even if you aren't necessarily developing them. So with that, let me hand it over to Frank to talk about best practice in managing and implementing a RPA program.
And it looks like we have a question. Do you want to address it now? Or do you...
I can go ahead and take it.
Okay. We have a question that says, I managed our AP team until recently. One limitation we've seen in exploring other automation software is that they're not able to read a PDF that is scanned from a physical piece of paper. Is your solution able to do this?
Yeah, so that's what I was describing the example earlier. So I think again, what's unique about our platform, it has an integrated set of capabilities, right? So we have, the unattended and attended automation I talked about. We also have what we call IQBot, but it's intelligent document processing. So that was the example I gave in terms of invoice coming into an inbox, and basically that bot is able to scan that information using fairly sophisticated technology. So that's built into the platform. There's also, process discovery built into the platform. So I think, as you're looking for RPA solutions to use, you want to look for ones that have those integrated capabilities. But absolutely, the fact that we have that integrated in is what makes both, accounts payable as well as accounts receivable processing so valuable. Right. Well, I'll go ahead and hand it to Frank, and then we will have time at the end of but go ahead and input your questions in, and then after Frank presents, we'll have time for additional questions as well.
Great. Thanks, Ken. So hi, everybody. Frank Kelly, as they mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Transformation Architecture here at Automation Anywhere. So what that basically means is I work with our customers and prospects to help them identify where the value is and what the potential of an intelligent automation program is, and then help them with a roadmap to value, right? And do things like, identify opportunities and read out to executives on the great things that the program's doing, right? So been with the company about 15 months now. Prior to that, I built and ran the intelligent automation program first at EMC and then at Dell Technologies after Dell bought us. So have a lot of experience, in a lot of the different business units driving value, right? And so when I talk to folks, right, and I talk to them about their journey, like, where are you on the journey? I flash up this slide, and basically, there's a lot of industry slides like this, right? And so what we're trying to do, and I think what most businesses are trying to do, is we're trying to move from the left-hand side of this slide to the right-hand side, right? Right-hand side. When people start their journey, they always look for the low-hanging fruit, right? Like, very first thing we automated was the HR offer letter process, right? And so these kind of cost-driven, non-cognitive type operations where you can gain a lot of value quickly, right? And so that's how folks start. They have to determine, what kind of model they're going to have. Is it going to be a federated model? Is it going to be a centralized model? Is it going to be a hybrid model? And when they do that, we see the most success with the federated models, right? So these types of tools are really easy to learn how to use. Once you learn how to use it, they're really easy to create automations with, right? And I say it's a light touch but strong governance kind of program, right? So I always recommend the federated model. It allows the folks in the business to kind of control their destiny with the automations, and we'll talk a little bit about that on one of the later slides. What kind of friction and fatigue are in the business, associated with the historical paths for automation, right? So we see folks, right? So they start their journey, right? They have small teams, and then they start to build. And what our job is to drive them to the right-hand side of the slide, which is, how do I use my, digital workforce now, right? And we like to say, free digital workforce. It's not really free, but it's pretty close to being free, right? If you put the work of 4 or 5 FTEs on one unattended bot runner, that's pretty close to free. But how do we get folks to start thinking about, hey, I have a free unlimited digital workforce. What kind of value can I drive within the business, right? And so that's really where, things get mature for business units, right? And where we really start to unlock a lot of value. And I'll talk. I have a slide that talks about, how we measure the impact of the program, and a little bit later on, I'll talk about some of those examples, right? But some key things that you want to think about as you're going through your journey, right, is it's key early on to get an executive sponsor, right? Because as you start to get these early wins and you want to expand to these other business units, an executive sponsor can help you do that, right? They can create that kind of horse race amongst the business units. They can help, market the program for you and get other people on board, right? And so then as you go along there and you get more and more mature and you have a lot of different automation, a lot of different processes that have been automated, you start to get a lot more sophisticated, right? You start to bring in new technologies like maybe you have an API call, maybe you ping an AI engine, right? Things like that. So and in Bot 4.0, we have the kind of this North Star vision where it's like, okay, where is all this technology going, right? And so think of this concept of like a self-service digital worker portal, right? And so as your program gets bigger, you have all these components, and now you're able to stitch things together really quickly. So if we go to the next slide, We talk about, how workforces have changed, right? Because what we're really talking about going to your business units and getting them to strategically think different about human capital management, right? Where, they get a demand for work, right? I need an HR analyst, right? I need a generalist in HR. So historically, you had three paths, right? You'd hire somebody as a direct employee, you would add some contingent labor, or you would outsource with an SOW, right? But now what we're trying to do is we're trying to get them to think, hey, how do I automate with a digital worker first? Okay, and if we think back to that self-service digital worker portal, everything's going self-service, right? You need more cloud storage. You go out to one of the cloud service providers and you just get more cloud storage, right? You need a new peripheral, you need a laptop or something like that. You just go to the IT page and you say, I want to order my laptop, right? And so these bigger programs now are getting to the point where they have these portals and they say, okay, come on in, look through the categories of digital workers, right? Whatever it is it invoice processing? Is it fraud detection? Is it queue management, right? Is it order management, right? And look through those 30, 40, 50 different categories and do a deeper dive into certain ones, right? When you say, hey, listen, I need somebody in queue management, right? I want to do a deeper dive there. And I want to look at, okay, I want a queue analyst, right? Somebody who, as the queue builds up, the bot goes in there and it does a certain amount of the work ahead of time before an analyst gets to it, right? And they say, hey, I want to order my digital worker, right? And as with a mature program, we have things like a private bot store and a public bot store where you can store components. With a mature program, you're going to be able to stitch all these components back together really quickly and produce a digital worker and deploy it to the business units in less time it would take them to identify, onboard, and train a new employee, right? And so the North Star on that is we want to be able to deliver that in less than 2 weeks. Right. So we want to get faster and faster with that. So think about it. I might be pulling some of my RPA components together and they might use an API call. They might ping an AI engine to get an output so that, the bot can go and do some further work. Right. So really cool stuff going on there. OK, so if we go to the next slide, what I want to talk to you about is, so I mentioned, the kind of the fatigue with the historical process, right? And so this is what RPA is trying to solve, right? Because the new technologies are designed to be consumed and used at the point where folks are doing the business, right? It's no longer intended to be a ticketing queue where it's like, hey, I need an automation, so I'm going to go put a ticket in, a request in, and wait for somebody to pick it up and create the automation for us, right? And historically, the only way to get automations created was to get on the IT roadmap, right? And so if we look at this slide, right, the IT roadmap is basically made up of two components, right? Where the IT team engages on the largest programs, right? The stuff in the blue box, right? The very transformational things. And those are the things you want the IT team working on, right? ERP system upgrades, new services, new technologies, e-commerce, right? Things like that, right? And then you have the gray box, which is all the requests that come from the business units, where the business units have taken the time to create a spec, get budgeting, negotiate it with the IT team on what was going to be delivered, and then submit it, right, and get it on the roadmap, right? So you have this backlog of requests in that gray box that get worked on when the larger programs don't, right? And that's what creates, the friction between the business units and IT, right? It's like, hey, I've submitted these requests, where are they, right? And so with an RPA program now, which again, light touch but strong governance, really an intelligent automation program, right? Light touch and strong governance. You can push that gray box back to the business units and say, with a federated model, and say, hey, I've enabled your teams to create their own automations, right? They have to follow our governance, right? They have to come in for a compliance check before going live. But you can do that now on your own, right? So they push that back. That frees up, some of the IT team time. And then it also addresses all these unmet automation needs of the business units, right? Things like, maybe the value wasn't high enough, didn't get over the hurdle to get on the IT roadmap, right? Maybe it's $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in a big company, right? But maybe you have a couple hundred of those, right? $5 million worth of value, right? That's not being addressed. Maybe there's a process where it's too complex and you can't write a spec that's good enough for the IT team to take it. Or maybe you're out of budget, right? Maybe you don't have any more budget, but you want these things automated. Or a really big one that I've seen a lot at Dell and across a lot of other customers is, there's a lot of sins of the business units that they won't bubble up to other teams to get help with. They just continue to try to solve them on their own because they don't want the bad publicity, right? Things like, folks are doing calculations and they're creating errors, right? Which are causing maybe some revenue and margin leakage. Or, maybe they don't have enough folks to renew contracts in time, and so there's a gap there, which again drives revenue margin and leakage, right? So all those things now get addressed by the business units, okay? And so if we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about how they do that, right? They do that with they scale and they get it to go viral within the business units by engaging citizen developers, right? And so these citizen developers are folks from the business units. And again, Automation Anywhere's tool is the easiest to learn how to use. And once you learn how to use it, it's the easiest to create automations with. And then, these citizen developers are in the business, working with the folks doing the work, working with their leadership teams, and, creating these automations, right? And usually they start small, right? And so don't be afraid to let them start small. Let them do something that maybe is 5 hours a month, right? Or maybe 20 hours a quarter or something like that, right? But what happens is, as they realize, hey, this capability is easy to use and it's reliable, and it's not like a human where there's errors made. I mean, I'm getting 100% accuracy, and then they start to go bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's really what gets it to go viral within the business unit and get you to driving points where you're getting 10, 15, 20, 50, $100 million on an automation-driven impact through your business, okay? And there's really two limitations, right, to what they can automate. One is if it requires a cognitive process, right? It has to come to a person, they have to think about it, and they have to make a decision. that has to come back to the person, right? And the only other limitation is really imagination, right? We want to get folks to the point where these ideas are going off in their head like popcorn, right? And that's what we mean by foster innovation, creativity, right? They start thinking about things like, hey, how can I do some directed marketing emails to my customers based on something that they bought yesterday, right? And follow up with a very distinct email that maybe there's tens of thousands of these that go out, so I could never have people work on them because the hit rate maybe is too low, but I could certainly have bots work on them, right? And that's what we mean by foster creativity and innovation, right? And so if we go to the next slide, and this is my last slide. So just a little bit on measuring that automation-driven impact, right? Because once you get a program, you really want to track it and you really want to showcase it, because this is what's going to lead you to getting more investment for more technology, right? And to bring other business units on to adopt this other technology, right? And so this is a generic slide that a lot of folks use, right? And we talk a couple of points here, right? We talk in terms of automation-driven impact because we kind of want to get ahead of, folks starting to poke at it and say, well, you say it's $100 million, but I didn't see $100 million to my bottom line, right? And so we'd say, okay, well, you probably saw 80, right? And so it's because there's things that we do in the business units that drive value other than just bottom line value, right? And so I'll hit on a couple of those as we hit these bullets, right? And so, and we also use dollars because as the program gets really big, we have a saying that when you're in front of executives, you want to be brief, be bright, and be gone, right? And so you can't really be talking to all the different SLAs in the business. You don't want to go in there and say, well, last month we created 1,000 HR offer letters, and then we processed, 1,500 invoices, and, on and on and on, right? We blocked, 14 fraud attempts, right? So we bubble it up to dollars, right? And then we talk to it. And these three bullets here are basically the generally accepted buckets that people will throw things into, right? And so headcount productivity savings seems pretty straightforward. But, we talk to business because folks in the business units get nervous about automation, right? So we talk to them and we say, hey, listen, around headcount, think of it this way, right? At the beginning of the year, you have 100% of your headcount. And there are three things that affect that, right? You have new initiatives you want to stand up. You have organic growth that you have to staff for. And you have attrition, right? And so depending where you are, if you're in a call center, you might have 35% attrition, right? So depending on where you are, you start with that 100%, between those other three buckets, you probably have at least a 15 percentage point spread on your staff that you need to backfill for. So now as you automate, you can just move these folks around, right? And so for attrition and, organic growth, those save you money on the bottom line. And now new services that you stand up, although you're not getting a P&L savings, maybe you're improving things like an employee net promoter score, right? And so real quickly, the other two buckets there, reduced outsourced spending, huge opportunity for intelligent automation, right? How much work has been outsourced to BPOs that can now be insourced directly to automation, saving the company high dollars. And then the last bullet, the value creation and risk management, that's really the limitless one, right? So if you've got, if you're an online retailer and you've got tens of thousands of stale quotes, right? Somebody went to the cart, created an order and abandoned the cart, right? Maybe after 2 weeks, you consider that a stale quote. Maybe you have a bot go in there, pulling all that information together and sending email messages on saying, hey, still interested in whatever you put in the cart, click through here and here's a discount coupon, right? So it's really limitless, that value creation piece. And then risk management, obviously, when you can get to 100% compliance, checking instead of sampling, that's huge, right? So that's it for my slide. So I wanted to leave a few minutes left for Q&A. I think we have about 9 minutes left. So I want to open that back up to the broader team here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you to everyone here. So we'll be monitoring both the chat and Q&A for any comments and questions. I did have one for the group actually, and would love your perspective, Ken, Frank, and Lisa for that matter, from the Gartner conference last week. Is I was speaking to a gentleman yesterday actually at the in-person portion of the MNCPA, and in our discussion, they've had some turnover on their finance team. So they're trying to recruit some new people to join. And obviously with the talent shortage, that's creating some unique challenges. But then they were also commenting on, hey, I need to make sure that I keep my controller and accounting manager empowered, happy, engaged to help retain them. I was hoping to hear from the three of you kind of on your perspective on how organizations can maybe start to think differently in terms of, hey, if I can't find someone to backfill on my team, how could I start thinking about RPA to fill that gap, whether it's existing customers or insights from the Gartner conference. So maybe Lisa, if you want to get us kicked off, that would be great.
Yeah, it definitely comes up to a topic that was even in the keynote last week. And really the conversation was that for us to really become the modern finance and accounting organizations that we all aspire to be, we have to really become experimenters and really change our mindset. And I think what you just described on the talent shortage is things like automation almost enable you to have like 1.5, 2 people with one person, and you're doing the work of 2 people with automation. And I think that's really exciting. It could be used as a recruiting tool and a retention tool, that like the organization is investing in digital elevation for their accounting and finance teams. And I think that's going to be actually a differentiator for companies as people are making talent decisions of where they go to work. So it was very much about how the leaders are even some of the leading companies in the keynote that were discussed were also like even all the way up to their CFO and controllers were attending the digital maybe automation training. Not that they were going to ever build their own bots, but they've got to change the behavior so that it becomes pervasive to the organization.
Yeah, I found that true at the bank as well, where, as we all know, accounting isn't always the most sexy function. And so, particularly as we were trying to recruit folks, they were excited about the opportunity to work with some of these, newer technologies. And frankly, they're very skilled. They don't want to be, sourcing data and creating reports. So we found that as a real positive for career development. And on top of that, as you mentioned, it's tough hiring. It's a very competitive environment to hire folks now. And especially as you grow, rather than trying to grow, finance on a proportionate basis, you can leverage these technologies to basically provide additional resources. The other thing that's interesting too is, historically, a lot of the manual repetitive tasks we would, bring to an outsourcing firm. And those are the exact same tasks that nowadays you can actually, insource, if you will, via a bot. So I agree.
And think about some of the pain points too, right? Where, month-end close, right? Friday night at midnight, the accounting team has to come in and they have to start the closing process, right? Usually it runs through Wednesday, right? They work all weekend. They work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, really a painful time in their life, right? And month-end close doesn't work because, somebody's got a birthday party for a kid on the weekend, right? They still have to work through it. So now think about, I've got the bots. I just have to make sure the bots get kicked off at midnight on Friday. I have to do a couple of checks on over the weekend now instead of working over the weekend to make sure they're still running. And now, the month and quarter end closes on Monday or Tuesday instead of the Wednesday, right? So that and word spreads on that, right? So it's like, why do I want to stay at a company that's not automating any of this stuff when I can get some of my life back by going to a firm that's got this in place, right? And I can work a more normalized schedule, right? So huge opportunities there, right?
Yeah. And Frank, that's maybe brings up kind of another question that I've heard from a few folks as well, that maybe they're a little bit further along in their RPA journey. Maybe they've automated an AR, AP, or an initial sort of use case, but maybe kind of speak to where you see the most common breakdown in an ongoing kind of maintenance or process for bots running, where if the bot fails for whatever reason, and then the accounting team or finance team is waiting on maybe IT to fix it, that creates obviously some friction. So what sort of advice would you have in terms of kind of tweaking the governance model or how things are operating, internally there to help streamline any sort of course correction that's needed?
Sure, we see it all the time, right? So it depends on, when firms decide, hey, I'm gonna start an intelligent automation program, and they choose their delivery model. The centralized model falls into that, what you just described there, right? It's like they get to 20, 25, or 30 bots, and then the team that was creating them now is supporting them, right? And so the federated model is much better, because now, you've pushed that work out to the business units. You're changing their mindset around human capital management, right? Which is like, I have a digital workforce I have to manage. And then, the technology has all sorts of monitoring and control, tools, right? So it's never that you're waiting and you don't know it's not running, right? So it's just a question of, why didn't it run, and who's going to fix it, right? And so when it's federated out to the business units, they do L1 support and they do change management, right? And they are the most qualified to do that, right? If you think about, what happens in a business when the IT domain application team decides, hey, we're going to have an application upgrade. Let's say it's a Salesforce upgrade, right? And they send out their notification that they say, these are the functions that are going to change. This is what's going to be impacted, and on and on and on, right? The business units are the ones that know what kind of impact that's going to have on business processes the best out of anybody. You don't want to have a third party or IT learning, how are these going to affect these bots now? Just let the business units manage that, right? And they do it in a very efficient manner, right? So it's and as they adopt it, they're getting better and better and better, and they're ready for new technologies to come in. And those new technologies are coming, right? And everything is a lot simpler, a lot more self-service, a lot more, self-consuming. So that's the way you want to set it up, and that'll be successful.
Great. We're still monitoring the Q&A here and chat, so let's give it a few minutes, because I know we just had some great content there. Hopefully that spurred some additional thoughts from the group. So let's give it a minute or two here.
I can just also mention one other question I often get, which is, people debating, like, is RPA sort of a short-term fix or a Band-Aid, or is it really a long-term strategic tool? And I think the answer is really both. In the short term, certainly, if you're about to implement like a new system, but you're 2 years off from an ERP implementation, or you're going to implement a new process change or re-engineer your process. Ordinarily, right, you'd say, hey, let's just wait, because traditional technology is very costly. Whereas RPA, you can implement in a matter of weeks at a very low cost. So even if a lot of it's going to be throwaway, you can still leverage the technology. But at the same time, I say it's a long-term strategic tool, because RPA exists basically because all systems don't talk to each other. And as we all know, it would be cost prohibitive to try to interconnect every single system and application via traditional technology. So there's, even if you have the latest core processing platforms, you're always going to have situations where you're having to move data or do processes across systems. And that's why it's a good, strategic long-term tool. I mean, as long as you're leveraging your core systems to their fullest.
Terrific. Well, it looks like we're at time here. So I guess, Lisa, any kind of last minute closing remarks before we turn things back over to Leslie to wrap up?
Well, we've already talked about it, but I think the other thing that I get asked a lot, and I get, probably maybe like, is that don't think, I know this sounds like maybe a new concept, but it is not like climbing Mount Everest without training. It's a very palatable thing to add as an initiative. And so happy to talk further and educate further on helping you walk across the bridge and adding automation to your business.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you to John and Lisa from eCapital Advisors, and Ken and Frank from Automation Anywhere. And thank you everyone for participating today online. We've got one more day left of MBAC 22. We hope to see you tomorrow. Please remember to fill out the session evaluations. They will pop up at the end of this session. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Thanks. Goodbye.
Thank you.